I've been drinking coffee since I think I was around age 13 when I first started with it. And it really started picking up when I was around 17 or so, working in restaurants. And then, I was in the army and went to college. And after that, it just kind of took off. And I drink about anywhere from a pot to 2 pots a day. Now, people get all worried about that. I've actually got a gene, apparently, according to 23andMe, that makes me less susceptible to the effects of caffeine. So it's, just something I get to enjoy. And the coffee that I drink these days is usually pretty good stuff. But, back in the 1980s, particularly the early 1980s and 1990s, it wasn't always like that. So I'm going to tell you not the entire story of my coffee drinking throughout my entire life, but how I got started and what it is that I liked about it, and then how I became essentially hooked. It's become an integral part of the way in which I set up my days. It's actually one of the first things that I do in the morning is go out and make myself some coffee or heat up some coffee from the previous day and get myself underway. So I had grown up as a kid seeing adults drinking coffee and, smelling it. That was probably the biggest thing was you would, they'd be roasting coffee, making it. And, oftentimes it was in like an automatic coffee maker or a percolator or stuff like that. And it usually wasn't very good coffee back then. A lot of Americans didn't really know much about coffee. It wasn't like, how it took off in the 1990s. So anyway, we'd go on camping trips or we'd be at Cub Scouts or pick anything. There'd always be adults drinking coffee. And I thought the smell was really good, but it wasn't, I tasted it a few times and I was like, I don't really like this. It doesn't really taste the way it smells. And then one day I found that I needed it and I'd gotten myself in trouble. So this was a Saturday and I was serving detention. And the reason I was doing that, I was at this middle school and one day I got caught throwing a snowball at this kid, Forrest Doolin, and I hit him in the head and he went and he tattletaled. And I think also one of the teachers saw it happen. So I wasn't going to get out of that. And you weren't supposed to throw snowballs at each other. We'd do it all the time, but you would get in trouble for it. So I think he at that time was the assistant headmaster. This guy, by the way, this is a bit of a digression. His name was Richard Butt, and he actually went by Dick Butt. Imagine having a name like that and choosing to be known as Dick Butt. Anyway, put that aside. I think he was one of the science teachers. And anyway, I'm in trouble. I got to show up on a very cold Saturday morning. It's the middle of winter. And Forrest got in trouble too. I don't remember exactly why, but so both of us show up and we're told, okay, go report to the hockey rink or skating rink. We had a kind of, rink that had been flooded and then, it froze over and it was used for skating, I think for the high schoolers. This was a middle school and high school adjoined to each other. It was a private middle school that I've talked about in other places. Anyway, we were told that we needed to clean up this rink and it would take us, I think we got dropped off around 9 in the morning and we'd be finished up around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think our parents also dropped us off with like some bag lunches. And it's cold out, we're in our boots, we're in our coats and hats and gloves and stuff like that. So Mr. Butt tells us, all right, you guys get out there. And first we had to shovel and we had to pick up sticks and we had to do all sorts of stuff to get this skating rink into decent shape. And we would get pretty cold, when you're on ice, your feet get really, really cold really quick because whatever boots you've got on, it's not going to be enough to keep the ice from leaching the heat out of your body. And, our faces are kind of exposed as well. I didn't have this great beard to keep me warm back then. And so he would, have us out there for an hour, and then he'd bring us in and he'd be like, okay, time for you to get a little break and warm up. And then at some point before lunch, he's like, I'm putting some coffee on. Do you boys want some? And I don't know if Forrest had ever drank coffee before, but I hadn't. But it was a warm liquid. And so he's like, you're not going to like the taste of it too much. So, here's some cream and sugar that you can put in it. And so we did that, and that made it pretty palatable, So I was like, oh yeah, this isn't too bad. And of course, you're getting kind of jazzed up on the caffeine and stuff. And so it was something that I got introduced to. And, I told my mom about it. I think she wasn't real happy that I was drinking coffee, but she kind of didn't care that much either. And then, it goes on after that. And I'm not really drinking coffee much. I mean, she would drink coffee every morning. And then the next main time is, like I said, I was working in restaurants. I started working at Kentucky Fried Chicken before I got finished with high school. And then shortly after that, I got a job at Ponderosa, which was a steakhouse. And we would sit around on break. And back then, you could actually smoke in restaurants. Restaurants had smoking and non-smoking sections. By then, I was actually starting to smoke as well. And cigarettes and coffee go together pretty well, or tobacco and coffee, we'll say. So, it was something that we would all do. We'd sit around and drink some coffee and smoke some cigarettes on our break. And it was how we would socialize. And again, not very good coffee, to be in these little mugs. And you drink your coffee and smoke your cigarette. Then you get back to working behind the grill or washing dishes or doing prep or whatever else it was going to be. And, I worked that place until I joined the Army. And then in the Army, man, I mean, we drank coffee all the time. It was there in the mess hall in the morning. And so, oftentimes it was kind of chilly. We were stationed in Germany, which has a very similar, at least southern Germany has a similar climate to Wisconsin. And, we'd drink our coffee and get on with the morning. It would help us wake up, and we would drink coffee out in the field. Our MREs had little coffee packets in it. You'd go out on exercises, and they'd have like a big thing of coffee that you could get access to. So you'd drink more and more of the coffee, and of course you'd smoke cigarettes too. And that was just part of how you did things. It was like that was your life. And so, I still wasn't drinking like good coffee or anything, but now when I come back, and I'm hanging out with my relatives, like my uncles and cousins and stuff, drinking coffee is part of adult life. And I, was drinking coffee in college. In the morning, they would always have coffee there at breakfast, and you'd have some coffee with your eggs or bacon or whatever it is you're eating. And then you'd have coffee after a meal, right? And oftentimes back then, they would also have like ice cream. And so one of my favorite things to do is get myself a nice mug of coffee. And then instead of putting cream in it, because I've always liked cream, you'd drop like an ice cream scoop in there and let it melt, like a chocolate one or vanilla or something like that. It was pretty good, right? And then I started getting into more and more fancy coffee. I found out about lattes and cappuccinos and espresso drinks of different sorts. And I actually went and got myself like a little crop espresso maker machine where you could it had the wand where you could foam your milk, right? And it had like the little, popper thing. You'd put your espresso into it. Before that though, now that I think about it, I got into the gourmet coffees, right? So we're talking early 90s, you could go to the grocery store and you could get yourself Irish cream, or you could get yourself hazelnut or stuff like that. We'd smell it. It smells so good. And so we'd make that, me and, my buddies, or me and my girlfriend sitting in my dorm room, or anything like that. And you go to restaurants and you start getting these more fancy frou-frou coffees. So anyway, by the time that we're in the middle of junior, senior year, I'm drinking better and better coffee and kind of getting used to it. And then it was funny, I had this German girlfriend for a while. And of course, she was used to drinking good coffee anyway. And we started hanging out, and partly because I had that espresso machine. And she came in and she told me stuff that was completely false. She'd sometimes, make things up just to see if I'd believe it. And so I did for a while. She was like, okay, when you put the espresso in and you tamp it down, you got to put your initial on it as well. Her name was Andrea, so she'd put an A. And then she'd be like, I'm making it for you, Greg, so here's a G. And I remember, because I was kind of gullible, telling somebody that one time, and they're like, who the hell told you that? Where did you get that idea from? And I was like, I don't know, somebody told me, so I figured it was true. And they're like, no, that's not true at all. So anyway, I get finished with college. I come here to Milwaukee, and I'm living over on Farwell Avenue on the Lower East Side and working as a third shift security guard. And we would drink coffee in the middle of the night to help us stay awake. But on Ogden and Astor, actually in the same building as the place where I now volunteer at a cat shelter, there was a cafe called Fairchild's. And it had recently opened up. And they did, all sorts of cool different lattes and cappuccinos and stuff like that. And I started hanging out there. And, we actually worked out a deal that got me to know one of the owners quite well. There were two women who were the owners. And it was kind of a rough neighborhood. So they were like, if you hang around until we close, we'll give you free coffee drinks. Because I was a big, tough-looking guy at the time. I'm still big. I don't know how tough-looking I am now at this stage. But, I was a little weird and scary looking back then. And I was, all muscle and bone back then. So the fatty guy that I am now, very different story. So anyway, I got to know the owner. And eventually she and I started going out, and then I started working behind the bar as well, making coffee drinks. And so I would work my third shift security gig and then show up at Fairchild's, get myself a morning bun, fresh squeezed orange and grapefruit juice, a fresh latte, have that, work behind the counter for a couple hours until it got slow, and then go back to my place and go to sleep, or sometimes me and this person would hang out. And then I would, get up and head into Fairchild's, go there, work until it was, time to be done basically, and then show up for my security job, which... When did it start? I don't want to say, I got off at 7 in the morning, so I started work usually officially at 11, although sometimes I'd have to do like a 1.5 shift or a double shift. So anyway, I'm drinking lots of good coffee. At that time, coffee culture in the 90s is becoming a big thing throughout the Milwaukee area, and everybody's got like their favorite kind of coffee to drink and their places to go. And so I'd go to other coffee houses, and, they'd do like poetry slams, or there would be like a band there, stuff like that. And then I'm there, I finish up my year in between, go to graduate school down in Southern Illinois, and I'm drinking coffee all the time there. I'm making coffee at home, drinking coffee at the diners and other places. There were a few cafes, and actually, now that I think about it, there were two coffee houses, One was kind of an upscale, a bit frou-frou, and I would go there once in a while with other philosophy people, or sometimes we'd have like reading groups there. But most of the time, I would go all the way down the strip to a place called the Long Branch Coffee House. And that was more kind of like downscale, folksy, hippie kind of coffee place that I would go to. And that actually was a lot of fun. You'd see a lot of people that you knew there. But there'd also sometimes be like people doing open mic and playing their instruments or singing. And they had good food there. I had quite a few dates where we went to the Long Branch. And it was a place that we'd often go for pre-gaming, which is, hanging out in a place before you go out to, the bars or the party that you're going to. So that was a fun place as well. And then, of course, I graduated from Southern Illinois University, moved to Indiana with my family, and we'd have coffee. It wasn't a huge deal, but I do remember like Uncle Aim, who I've talked about in other videos. He and I would often have coffee together. He liked to go to the gas station. He'd like, this one's a good place, and we can get these creamers here and stuff like that. And so I just kind of kept up with it. And I've been, really, the last bit of the story that I'll tell you about is when we moved here to Milwaukee, my wife started a chapter of Shut Up and Write. Now, that's exactly what it sounds like, and we can tell other stories about that. Everybody meets, you shut the hell up for an hour, you do your writing, and then you get to talk about it. And she had us doing that at Stone Creek, the Stone Creek Factory Cafe. Stone Creek is a local coffee company. They do their own roasting and sourcing. They're actually a B Corp. They're quite good as a corporate citizen, you could say. And I got to know the place and the people. It's actually one of my favorite places to go here in the Milwaukee area. And it was just a few blocks from our house, so I would go there quite frequently. And they have some really, really good coffee. And that's when I also started, going on a more high-fat, high-protein diet, lower carbs, and switching to brevets rather than lattes. I still go there from time to time. Not as much now that we're in our new office space since we have free coffee downstairs. So I make my coffee in the morning and then come here and get myself some coffee. If I'm teaching at Marquette or at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, I get coffee there. And it just kind of sees me through the day. And no really great big turning point to this story. I'll probably keep drinking coffee at the rate that I am until I die, or my doctor tells me that I can't do it anymore. And it's something that, I look forward to in the morning and I enjoy with friends and family and colleagues and coworkers of different sorts. And that's pretty much the end of the story where I currently am right now.